Yes, people are signing up. So we'll have a good crowd, uh, Glenna, for you. Uh,
Well, very good. I'm assuming that we have some people who have never read Bleak House, for whom this is the first time, as we did last time. So I'm gonna try and keep that in mind.
yes, yes. I'm particularly interested in the responses of people who have never read the novel before, because not knowing the ending and sort of figuring out where the plot is going is one of the pleasures of reading this novel. And so our convention, our governing convention, is that you try to, if at all possible, to avoid making reference to anything that happens beyond chapter 13. So we pretend, it's hard to do, that we are all reading this for the first time and that we are going in imitation of the serial publication format that Dickens used. Uh, we're reading monthly number by monthly number, and the chapter assignments that we are following do break the novel up into elements that correspond to uh, the monthly installments in the original publication. So we try not to give away. No spoilers is the rule. And but it is possible to refer back to things that we have read before. And that, in fact, is one of the pleasures of reading this novel. I think that, um, you know, there are so many characters in this novel that it's sometimes difficult to keep them all straight. And so a character will emerge as a fairly important character who was mentioned only briefly in passing early in the novel, and you may not remember when that character first appeared. Um, and I once tried to do a keep a record of ha, when the first chapter in the novel appears in which there is not a new character. There are new characters who are introduced in every chapter of the novel, at least halfway through the book. So uh, you, you, one of the things that we may want to do is, oh, when did that character first show up in the novel? And I didn't realize, oh, golly, sometimes they are referred to and their name is not used. And then later on, we learn the name of the character. So that makes it even harder to keep things straight. Um, so uh, I've stalled a little bit past 1 o'clock, the California starting time. I want to remind people that we will meet again next month on, I think it is the 23rd. Is that correct, Courtney? Um, uh, and I think that may be the Sunday after Thanksgiving. I hope your holiday plans will not get in the way. Uh, but we will not be meeting in December. There's too much holiday stuff to get in the way. And football games and all that sort of thing. I always am aware in the fall that people who come to the Dickens Fellowship from San Francisco, from Santa Cruz rather, are giving up their football Sunday and choosing Dickens over that other American ritual, not Thanksgiving, but football Sunday. So, yes. So I want to welcome everyone to the second session, second meeting on Bleak House that follows on our last month's introduction to the novel. And I want to apologize a little bit for having managed the time, I think, rather poorly. We had a wonderful discussion, I thought, of the opening chapter and indeed the opening paragraph of that novel. So we didn't spend much time talking about the Esther chapters of the first of the beginning of the novel. So I've told our discussion leader for today, Glenna, that she is entitled to go back and talk about the Esther chapters if she would like. So our discussion leader for today is Glenna Matthews. I want to thank Glenna for having volunteered to do this. Glenna is a social historian and a longtime participant in Dickens Universe and Dickens Project activities, and a faithful member of the fellowship and an experienced reader of Dickens. So I want to thank Courtney for being here as our technology supervisor and tech assistant. And if you have a if you have a question or a comment that you would like to make, use the raised hand function or wave your hand physically, and Courtney or I will try to recognize you in the order in which you have raised your hand. And uh, uh, Courtney has said that she may not be able to do that when she's showing slides, but I will do my best to look for physical hands or the raised hand function. So I'll turn things over to Glenna and let Glenna lead the discussion. So Glenna.
Thank you very much, John. Let's start the screen sharing right away, Courtney, if we may. Yeah, this is the slide I wanted.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to begin by looking, this is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Chesney Wold, the home, the ancestral home of the Dedlock family. And I want to begin, this is the frontispiece to the book, but I wanted to begin by, I mean, the name of the book is Bleak House, or I noticed the Brits put the emphasis on the second word, Bleak House. And so I really want to think about Dickens and the theme of domestic architecture, the interiors of homes, and so on, because I think he writes about it more vividly than anybody else that I can think of offhand. So this is the first home that we see, which is a grand home. And I also want to suggest, I mean, this novel is superb in showing us an incredible range of British society, but as well as people from the Dedlocks to Joe the crossing sweeper, there's also all these different homes. Okay, next slide, please. Now this paragraph is from chapter 3. And would somebody like to read it? I think this is such an important passage.
I will, Glenna.
Okay.
Your mother, Esther, is your disgrace, and you are hers. The time will come, and soon enough, when you will understand this better and will feel it too, as no one save a woman can. I have forgiven her. But her face did not relent. The wrong she did to me, and I say no more of it, though it was greater than you will ever know, than anyone will ever know but I, the sufferer. For yourself, unfortunate girl, orphaned and degraded from the first of these evil anniversaries, pray daily that the sins of others be not visited upon your head, according to what is written. Forget your mother, and leave all other people to forget her who will do her unhappy child that greatest kindness. Now go.
Well, that's some birthday celebration, right? Does anyone have any comments about this passage? We can't linger too long in any one passage or we won't get through, but I'll tell you why it means a lot to me. I think Esther not only is one of the more interesting characters in this novel, but I mean, I have come to just love the character of Esther. And this passage is you try and come to terms. Esther is not an easy character to figure out. And I think honorable people disagree about Esther. This passage is essential when you try and come to terms with who and what Esther is. Any questions or comments?
Kathy,
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Pat. So who is it who's speaking to Esther here?
Her guardian, her, the woman who's been taking care of her.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, so this is the one person that she should be able to turn to for love. And what she gets is this horrible condemnation, like you're a burden, your mother was a burden, and this is a birthday. Okay, Kathy?
This scars Esther for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Even metaphorically, in that she has, I won't say a bad thing. She's a child that no one, there's only this, I believe it's out of religious belief. I've read various things about what made do this but Esther lived this incredibly horrible life. I mean, she wasn't beaten, but she has no sense of her own value. And, that starts the story where so many people begin to give her value and begin to value her, and her self-esteem grows from that point. But this is her lowest point, and she eventually, through the novel, is, the trajectory of her not only getting self-esteem, but becoming a happier person.
Right. Mary?
It's amazing to me that Esther survives this and goes on to be a normal person. I think also the godmother said that it would have been better had she never been born. And that's a very hard one to carry through life.
Right. Alexis?
I'm wondering about what the godmother is saying. I have forgiven her the wrong she did me, and I say no more of it, though it was greater than you will ever know. Then, what is this great wrong that she's done to this woman? I don't know what that is. I mean, even
It's
if we
burdening her with the care of a child.
Well, I know, but it says greater than anyone will ever know, but I, the sufferer,
Well,
I
she
don't
didn't
know.
want to. She didn't want to be a mom.
You think that's it? That there's nothing else behind that? I just find that very, very strong statement.
Well, in the humiliation, we'll find
Well,
out
we
more.
don't
Again,
know
we don't
that.
want
We
to go
don't
into
know
it.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want to go into all the ins and outs quite yet, because that's giving away further plot
Well,
development.
maybe that's it as we get further in. I just found that awfully strong and unnecessarily mysterious.
I think it's also the stain of illegitimacy that the godmother feels reflects on her as well as on the parent.
Taking it onto herself. Okay.
It's not just the burden of being the mother substitute, but it's her religious upbringing and her social conventions that say this is a disgrace that leaves me feeling disgraced.
Okay.
And there's one other thing about this statement that Esther, when Esther talks about herself, she says, I'm not sure that I even have anything to do with this story. This story is not about me. I keep trying to talk about other people. And the godmother here says, the wrong she did to me. This story is about me.
Yeah.
Whereas Esther is so self-effacing that she doesn't even want to bring herself into the story, although she reluctantly acknowledges that maybe she has something to do with it.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Yes,
Oh.
go ahead.
John, I want to get, I don't want, we could talk the whole time about this particular passage, but, so
Go-
Sarah?
Yeah, so at this point, she has a complete love and regard and belief in her godmother, because her godmother goes to church and is a very religious person, and she believes in her. She believes that she's a good person. And then up to the last chapter that we read, chapter 13, we don't get any indication of how her understanding of her godmother changed or didn't change. But we can learn that her judgment towards people definitely changed. Like when she sees a lady, what's her name, that does all this wonderful work for America, but doesn't take care of her children.
This is Jelly Bean.
She knows the difference. She knows it's not the right thing to do. And this was her situation actually when she was a child. Her godmother did good things, or a religious person, but she didn't take care of the child, of Esther. So I think there is up to chapter 13, but I think there is a lot to find out in the future about how Esther definitely has a good judgment about things at this point when she moves to Gentile's home.
Okay, Paul?
I just wanted to know, in Victorian society, whether this attitude of visiting the sins of others on the child was widespread, or whether this is a peculiarity of this person being who she is.
I think this is an exaggerated example, but I do think that people felt that there was a taint that came along with illegitimacy that stained the whole family. Margaret?
Thanks, Glenna. But this statement is an inference, isn't it? I mean, the word illegitimacy is not stated here.
No.
And so my question is, what did the first readers gather from the statement? But more important, what does Esther herself gather from the statement? Does she understand that she was born out of wedlock from the statement?
No.
I don't think so.
Thank you.
I don't think Esther fully grasps what the stain is.
No.
She's a child.
2 or 3 things occur to me. The 18th century had been much more accepting of illegitimacy. You can see some of that in Jane Austen, particularly in her letters. The great wrong that she's saying was done to her, I can't remember where we learn what that was, but it's the reason that the godmother is not married. And that does get explained. But at any rate, if you tell a child that he or she is guilty, they tend to accept the blame. This novel, and Dickens in general, is overflowing with abused children. And we see, in some cases, how they grow up. Esther feels that she has to earn love, which is one of the better possibilities for an abused child.
Right. Dorothy?
Yes, David has already hinted at what the original question was, the wrong that was done to the godmother, which doesn't come until later when she has given up. And I just wanted to say we can't answer that right now. Because
Yeah.
it's under.
Kathy?
Oh, I just wanted to add, I'm a social worker and I used to work with women and children. Now I work with aging, but all I can just tell you from dealing with, kids that were abused by their mother in any way, kids always, no matter what happens, they want their mother. And, sometimes it's unbelievable that they would have, but I mean, I think it's genetic. I mean, who do you have to cling to? Is that person who you gave birth to? And no matter what, I never saw a different situation. And the whole time I did this,
Yeah.
they want, that they were going to do anything they could to get back to their mother. And I just think that's, as I said, I think it's genetic and the human race sort of depends upon it, unfortunately.
Well, I think you guys have all said really interesting things. And yeah, I mean, if you don't know anything about your mother and and you're doing your best to love somebody who shows you no love, surely you're gonna think about who your mother might be. And let's see, we'll take a couple more questions, and then the next passage that we want to look at is, more of, well, Esther and her doll and why the doll might mean so much to her, which is related to what we're talking about now. But let's go with Barbara and Ginny and then move on.
Okay, I just have a quick thing. I just wanted to mention that at the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, my grandparents had a neighbor who had a child that was born deaf, and they kept him locked in the attic. They were so ashamed because it reflected on them genetically.
Well, look at Rosemary Kennedy, who was, shunted off.
Exactly.
And Ginny?
Yes, I was going to say this paragraph and the whole setup of her living with this that, didn't care about her is all part of the mystery that I think Dickens weaves throughout Bleak House. There's lots of mystery going on in every chapter. There are things that are referred to that you don't really have an answer to until you move on in the book. But I thought this set up a great comparison with what happened, when she leaves her aunt's house to go to school, nobody cares that she's leaving. But then the next time when she leaves from school to go off to with Ada and Richard, everybody's sorry to see her go, including the gardener, who she didn't even realize knew who she was. That, she realized there the contrast of this was so great, showing that how nobody cared about her when she left its house or had any real emotional attachment to her. And this hinting around is definitely the way they would have talked about somebody being illegitimate. I think people wouldn't have come right out and said to her, your mother, had you out of wedlock. They would say it just like this, that you're a disgrace, and pass it on. And the Victorians were very big on, illegitimate children. That should have been the worst thing that could happen to you. I mean, look at Oliver Twist, where, she is from a good family, but rather than disgrace her family, she ends up in a workhouse giving birth and dying. So it is a big deal in Victorian times to have an illegitimate child.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next quote. Okay, let's just read this silently together, because if we talk about each passage, we're not ever going to get through. But just the point is that she's investing the doll with so much humanity, with so much life. As someone was saying, when you don't have a mother, you want to know about your own mother, but it's human nature to want to have somebody to love and be loved by. And, you know, my dear old doll, and here's another passage about the doll. If we could move on. And this one, I think somebody should volunteer to read.
Martha?
Mrs. Rachel was too good to feel any emotion at parting, but was not so good and wept bitterly. I'm sorry, but all the pictures are covering up the letters, so I don't, can we get rid of that by any chance? Something thought I ought to have known her better after so many years and ought to have made myself enough of a favorite with her to make her sorry then. When she gave me one cold parting kiss upon my forehead, like a thaw drop from a stone porch, it was a very frosty day. I felt so miserable and saw? Sorry?
Self-reproachful.
So reproachful that I clung to her and told her it was my fault. I knew that she could say goodbye to me so
easily.
No, Esther, she returned, it is your misfortune. The coach was at the little, do you want me to stop there or keep going?
No.
The coach was at the little lawn gate. We had not come out until we heard the wheels, and thus I
left her
with a sorrowful heart. She went in before my boxes were lifted to the coach roof and shut the door. As long as I could see the house, I looked back at it from the window through my tears. My godmother had left Mrs. Rachel all the little property she possessed, and there was to be a sale, and an old
hearthrug
with roses on it, which always seemed to me the first thing in the world I had ever seen, and was happy.
hanging outside.
What outside?
Hanging outside
in the frost and snow. A day or two before, I had wrapped the dear old doll in my own shawl, quietly laid her, I am half ashamed to tell it, in the garden, oh God, I'm going to cry, in the garden earth under the tree that shaded my old window. I had no companion left but my bird, and him I carried with me in his cage.
Oh my goodness.
How I never thought that would happen.
Well, it is
how
a
she
very
felt.
poignant passage.
Yes, certainly is.
John, did you want to say something about the passages about the doll?
There's a lot to say. There's a very well-known psychoanalyst named D.W. Winnicott who writes about what he calls transitional objects that children from a very early age, from infancy on, use as a kind of substitute for the presence of the mother. And the task, Winnicott argues, of infancy and early childhood is to separate from the mother, to learn to make that transition. And the blanket or the doll, the teddy bear, that, I had a dear teddy bear that I remember from early in my life, is what helps the infant or the child to make that transition to independence, that the child is separate from the mother. And so play with the doll is part of that activity of separation and individuation and becoming a person of your own. And so what Esther is doing is playing things that she doesn't have a language to express. Or she's remembering doing that, because remember that this is
Second time.
Esther writing as an adult from retrospectively, not, but she's writing from the point of view. She's using her memories of her childhood in order to talk about this. So what is the doll for her? The doll is a kind of mother figure. Mother, she has no mother, so the doll is a mother. When she comes home from school, she tells the doll all her secrets. When she leaves a place and buries the doll, what is she doing? What's the significance of that activity? Is it part of the separation process, the normal process of separation and becoming an individual, or is it something more profound for her? These are the mysteries. The doll is a mystery that we need to think about, and it has complex meanings, complex significance for Esther. And I think we need to keep the doll in mind as we read forward, because the doll is not exactly a character, but a figure in Esther's memory. And when she, in a later passage, has dreams, she has dreams about the time when she was with her godmother and the doll. So the doll is part of her both conscious and unconscious memory.
Thank you. Pat?
Yes. I'm going to go to the point, because it's Dickens who's writing all this. I mean, this is not a real person, but I think what he's doing, and now that we've gone back to it, and we know how, I'm going to use sickeningly sweet the Esther person seems to be with everyone she meets. Everyone is dear, darling, and wonderful, that Dickens is maybe setting us up to understand why she is so sickeningly sweet in her as the chapters go on. That's my theory. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what, when now that we've looked more carefully at this chapter, I that's what I think.
Very good. Well, let's move on to the next slide. Now this one, I'm going to read out loud. By this time, this is the part that we're actually, this is the first chapter in this month's assignment. And this Esther has just arrived at Bleak House. In chapter 8, we learn why Bleak House is called Bleak House. And this is early on in the chapter. Every part of the house was in such order, and everyone was so attentive to me, that I had no trouble with my 2 bunches of keys, though what with trying to remember the contents of each little storeroom drawer and cupboard, and what with making notes on a slate about jams and pickles and preserves and bottles and glass and china and a great many other things, and what with being generally a methodical, old maidish sort of foolish little person, I was so busy that I could not believe it was breakfast time when I heard the bell ring. And at this point, I'm going to say a few things about why this passage, I think, why it resonated so much with me. First of all, the sentence that says keys, I just want to call your attention to the fact that in this period, there were many things that were part of household, equipment, so to speak, that were so valuable that they were kept under lock and key, like sugar. You didn't go to a supermarket and buy a 5-pound bag of sugar. It was in a loaf, and you didn't want servants to nab little bits of sugar when they were needing to be indulged or thought they needed to be indulged, so that the keys, it wasn't just the key to the front door. Their keys were, it's an incredibly complicated system. So for a young woman to be entrusted with the keys almost as soon as she arrives shows that John Jarndyce had observed her in many ways and felt that she was worthy of the trust. Now, something else I want to say, I'm really struck by how often Dickens gives us lists like this, the jams and pickles and preserves and so on. And I want to say the Industrial Revolution did many horrible things. There was so much exploitation, so much human suffering. People died in industrial accidents. But one thing positive that it did was that it created the capacity for ordinary people to have more consumer goods. And so I wanted to, would you put on the next slide? And then we'll go back to the earlier one. I want to tell you just briefly, this is a book that came out in 1987. And the author, who's both an architect and an architectural historian and writer, argues that it was in the 17th century in the Netherlands, because of the level of commerce in the Netherlands, that homes began to be what you might call comfortable. Even castles in an earlier period were drafty. Nobody was going to talk about comfort. But then when you get to a certain level of prosperity in the society, where there's the emerging bourgeoisie, and people can afford, here's one object that gives you an instance. In an earlier period, there weren't enough chairs for everybody in a household to sit, particularly if you had a large family of children. So chairs, there might be one chair or two chairs for the husband and wife. And what Rybczynski argues in this book is that the great Dutch genre artists of the 17th century, supremely Vermeer, they didn't set out necessarily to document this change, but the change created, the change inspired their imaginations, and they created wonderful depictions of ordinary life, Dutch genre painting. And what I want to suggest, and we can go back to the earlier slide, if you would, Courtney, is that Dickens and his contemporaries, this is a generation where consumer goods are more widely available. And I think that Dickens, who had an imagination of such magnitude and magnificence, that his imagination is ignited. And just, the fact that he has lists in more than one occasion, and he goes into such particular description about the interior of a house. And last year, of course, we read Old Curiosity Shop. Again, such a variety of houses in that, a wagon, a store. Go back to David Copperfield, where the Peggotty family lives in an overturned boat. Dickens has this incredible capacity to characterize different domestic interiors. And then the final point I want to make about Esther in her capacity now as the mistress of the house, which is a lot of responsibility, is this Bleak House comes out in 1853, and in 1854 a poem is published written by Coventry Patmore, where he uses the term angel in the house. An angel in the house became an important archetype in Victorian Britain, but also in the US. I'm familiar with it because I'm a US historian. The angel in the house was submissive. She had no demand, she had no self-interest that she asserted. She was always thinking of the needs of other people. And I want to pose the question, as we read through the book, to what extent is Esther an angel in the house. I think that one of the things that makes Dickens so interesting is that sometimes he has heroines who are really conforming to this stereotype. But I think sometimes he subverts the stereotype in interesting ways. And I think sometimes he subverts the sentimentality of domesticity in interesting ways. And I just want to pose that as an issue for us to think about. Barbara.
Many years ago in England, I took a class on the history of England, and my professor asserted over and over again that yes, the Dutch had made home a home and made it possible for people to have chairs to sit on, but it was the English who invented the power lathe and made it so that all the legs of the chair were the same size.
That's good. Kathy?
Okay, I think this is part of the trajectory going up of Esther, feeling, more of a good person. Because what she's taking now, and I know it is the angel in the house that, she is going to, essentially be a managerial person. Yeah, but she's not risen to a elite point. And I wondered when I was reading it, like, why the heck would they just make her in charge of all the food in the house? But I can see that it's a stage she must go through to, to heal from the scars that she, was given by her childhood.
Okay, good. Mary?
You mentioned technology, but I noticed the things that Dickens mentions. He mentions jams, pickles, and preserves. And I think women in that time, and yes, it was women who did that, that had very little to do with technology. Canning and so forth was a domestic thing that a lot of women did, and some still do it today. The bottles, glass, and china, maybe so. But I don't think technology had much, if anything, to do with the jams, pickles, and preserves.
Well, I didn't mean to suggest that they were technological. I'm saying consumer goods, some of which involve technology.
Oh, okay.
And Sarah?
I just want to talk about, like, she refers to herself as a foolish little person. And one thing, like, she changed in many ways from the beginning to this point, but thinking that she's not smart is a thing that repeats itself. She first tells it to the doll, and then she tells it to Mr. Jarndyce. She says, "Why do you trust me so much? I'm not smart enough." And he tells her, "You are smart enough for me." So which is very beautiful. So that's what, that's what I'm following. Like, she is still thinking she is not smart.
Well, she sure does harp on that. John?
I was going to call attention to the end of that sentence that Sarah just mentioned, and it's methodical, old maidish sort of foolish little person. And I'm interested in the old maidish part of that sequence of phrases. It's not just that she presents herself as foolish and not very smart, but she also assumes she's a little too quick to think of herself as old and unmarriageable. And when we looked at the illustrations last month, I tried to suggest that the little old lady caption to that first image of Esther standing in front of Chancery and there's Miss Flight on one side and Ada on the other, that was a mirror scene, and that the little old lady could refer to Esther as well as to Miss Flight, and that
Yeah.
Esther has a hard time thinking of herself as as young and attractive and marriageable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then as we see later, there's a whole Dame Durden, and she has all these nicknames that essentially neuter her.
Yes. And one other thing, I was so busy that I could not believe it was breakfast time when I heard the bell ring. Keeping herself busy is an essential part of Esther's self-concept. Busy, busy, busy. Keeping busy means that she doesn't stop and have time to reflect. And if she's being good and being a busy little housekeeper, then that's a way that she thinks that she can win love to herself.
Yep.
You need to notice as you read the times when Esther stops and reflects. What does she dream about? Where is her mind going when she's not keeping busy?
Oh, she's such an interesting, complicated character. I read it years ago when I was much, much younger. Then I read it for the Universe 2012. I read it a few years ago when we talked about it the last time in the fellowship. But each time I reread it, I find new facets of Esther. David?
Well, I think 2 points. One is Esther feels she has to earn love. People won't love her unless she's doing something that makes her useful, makes her sympathetic. And relatedly, she's very uncomfortable with her emotions, her sexuality. She comes across as dreadfully coy when she finds somebody attractive. And I think this is because her self-definition is as somebody who's on the sidelines rather than in the game.
Yeah.
Old maidish.
Kathy?
I just wanted to say, even if you've watched the BBC film movie, which is actually really good, she, she's portrayed by an actress that is not very lovely. And I wondered about that, like, why is she so unattractive? So I think even, the BBC, whose films I love, took on this idea, took on the whole persona of her not being an attractive person.
Well, we've noted before that in a lot of the illustrations, like that first one that John alluded to of them out in front of the chancery, Esther's face is turned away. We don't see Esther's face that often. Leslie.
Hi. I think it's really telling going back to that to the goodbye when she's wishing saying goodbye to Miss Rachel, and she's blaming herself for the fact that go away bad timing. She's blaming herself for the fact that they're cold to her. And it's all her fault. I guess what I'm trying to say is that she feels, I think that she's the one in control of how those people that she grew up with were treating her. She felt that she had control over that. And so this busyness, I think, is a part of that desire to have control over, if I keep doing this and this and this and this and this, then I have control over how I am seen by others.
I think that's a really interesting insight. Alexis?
Yeah, but we're meant to see immediately, she may think she's unattractive, but immediately Guppy falls in love with her.
Right.
It's love at first sight with that. So she's not so, and then she doesn't know, after all the foolishness of his proposal, whether to laugh or whether to cry, you know. So you know, I think we're meant to see it's all in her head about not being attractive enough.
Part of the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Pat?
Well, certainly. I mean, she's been told that since infancy by the person who brought her up, that she was unworthy, back to that chapter 3. And so she's overcompensating for what she's been told that she is, which is next to nothing. So with all of this busyness and trying to do more, yada, 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 she's overcompensating. And so she's trying to prove her worth, I guess. I don't know if she's consciously aware of that, but it seems to me that's what's going on here. You know, is that she's overdoing it because she thinks she's not worthy.
Yep. Okay. Kathy?
I just want to say one more time, she is a typical abused child. I mean, it's not particularly about this book. I mean, Dickens has incredible insight into this personality because he was, you know, he was a person who was really involved in women and improving the lives of women. I think he even had a big group that he funded or something. And, you know, he was interested in how children were abused. So he's got it. And today, like I said, this is how abused children feel. I mean, somebody else said, you know, they blame themselves. They do. They always do, because you can't leave that, you know, your ideal of your mother go. And so Esther is being, I think, of almost any abused child I ever saw. You know, sorry.
Well, yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure we focused on that that original passage.
Mhm.
Okay, so shall we move on to the next slide? Well, the one after this, yeah. Okay, so here's a visit to the brickmakers. And again, when we're looking at all the different aspects of home and home life, we started off with Chesney Wold, and now we're in a really grim environment, and the description of the visit to the brickmakers is so heartbreaking. So, you know, when we look, we see Mrs. Pardiggle looking disapproving. And I should mention, I don't think we have an illustration of Mrs. Jellybees, but Dickens obviously wants us to understand what it means to live in a completely disorderly house. And I don't mean a house of ill repute by disorderly, but just, you know, where the woman who allegedly should be managing the household is not paying attention. And so that household has the means to be in better shape, but nobody to supervise. This household, people are desperately poor. A child dies while they're there.
Oh.
Mrs. Pardiggle is looking disapproving, and the young women are overcome with grief and heartbreak at what they're witnessing. Does anyone have any comments about this picture, or for that matter, the scene where they visit, the written scene where they visit that household and witness the tragedy? Kathy?
First of all, I think someone, or you did, mention the angel in the house. And, part of what's happening here is, Mrs. Partridge and Mrs. Jellyby are, ridiculously horrible mothers. And, this is part of comparing what Esther, she's not a mother yet, but she's runs a perfect household. So there's two things happening. Esther keeps a very, very well organized household, which is part of the angel in the house. And secondly, Dickens has, or I guess interpreters of the book, say telescopic philanthropy. And, Mrs. Jellyby, the horrible housewife and, actually torture of her children. And Mrs. Pardinkle, who, her kids hate her, are, just like, devils in the house, not the angel. So it's two, I see it as two things that really are happening that Dickens is trying to show you, and that's all.
Okay, Ginny?
I was going to say this scene, I love this picture and I love this scene because Mrs. Pardiggle and her boys and all these people come in all dressed up and are going to tell these people how they need to sort out their lives. And the husband saying, I beat her yesterday. I'm going to beat her tomorrow. We aren't going to have food. We're not going to do this. And go ahead and talk your talk, but get out of my house when you're done. I mean, you look at him, the way he lays there. He could care less. And this woman comes in to sermonize, she knows nothing about what his life is like and isn't about to really be able to change it, just to criticize it. And it's really only Esther who, realizes that the baby has passed away and steps in to, sort of give it a little funeral and cover the corpse. But Mrs. Pardiggle thinks she's like the answer to everything, to, pontificate to these families that have nothing. And I love the way Dickens, we have Mrs. Jellyby, who's doing it by mail, worrying about people in Africa. And although she's worrying about people in her neighborhood, she's not really doing anything to directly help them, just criticize them about the way they live.
Right. John?
I was just what was just said was excellent about the structure of this visit, and Mrs. Pardiggle is doing something that was a middle-class activity, which is called visiting the poor. And visiting the poor has as its principal aim not to help the poor with their miserable living conditions, but to get them to be better Christians. And so the visitor, Mrs. Pardiggle, has religious pamphlets to distribute. And one of the things that the man on the floor says is, yes, we got the little pamphlet that you left last time. No, I haven't read it. No, I won't read the one that you hand to me now. It's a refusal of that presumption that a religious pamphlet is going to improve their lives. But I wanted to just ask people just to read more closely this illustration. Who is doing what, and how is the the body positions of people, and the furniture, and the activities. How is the politics of this image, of this illustration, supported by the way in which the illustration is designed?
You notice there's only one chair. Alexis?
Yeah, you notice the man lying on the floor, that's utter contempt. No man would ever lie on the floor with some woman who is seated in front of him. So you see the utter contempt he has for her. And not only does he say he won't read that pamphlet, he says, who's to say there's anybody here can read that pamphlet? Nobody
Yes.
can read, and it's just stupid of Mrs. Particle to make that kind of assumption. So the contempt that he displays for her is really warranted, I think.
That's really good. I mean, who in the working class family, no one stands up, which would be a sign of respect for a member, a woman of a higher class. So the fact that he continues to lie on the floor, is a resistance to everything that she represents in his life. The class difference, the presumptuous visiting structure of this scene. He's the only one who looks at her. What are the other people doing? What's the guy in the chair doing?
Petting the dog.
He's nursing the dog, and the poor young mother is nursing the dying baby. Whoever the other woman is, her friend, sister, whatever, is doing the laundry, I guess, or attempting to. And the men in the doorway are sort of laughing, I think, and jeering at Mrs. Particle too, admiring their friend maybe for how he dares lounge about in front of her.
Could you say that the dog is looking at her?
Did you notice the little toy on the floor? I found that surprising, that they actually would have a toy for the child.
I love the way the little Particle boys are looking so resentful, and it's conveyed so well economically. I mean, they aren't scowling necessarily, but you can tell by the way their shoulders are slumped and so on, that they've been dragged to places like this too often, and their allowance money extracted from them against their will. And
So aside from the spilled beverage on the floor, the house is in very good order. It's not like what you would imagine the Jellaby house to be.
It's nicely displayed on the mantle.
Barbara, you have your hand up.
I just don't want us to forget that there are still many Jellabys and Particles out there doing this very same thing nowadays.
If I might turn autobiographical just for a moment, years ago I was teaching a sewing class in the barrio in East San Jose, another lifetime, and there was a woman coming from a clinic to this. I was teaching to a mother's club. There was a woman coming from a clinic to tell them about birth control, and they were all dressed up. It was an exciting occasion, and she stood them up. She never showed up, but then another woman came, and she did not know that I was a middle-class woman. And it's the only time in my life I've been addressed this way. She addressed them with such, well, just be sure you're on time for the next meeting. She'll come back. And she was scolding them. They were all there in a timely fashion, dressed up and ready for this woman that was going to give a program, who stood them up. but they were being scolded by this woman, somebody else from the clinic who was not the person who was going to give the talk. And I opened my mouth and said, "Why are you scolding them? They're not the ones that are at fault here." And she was quite startled because she didn't expect, it's class privilege. We're not used to being scolded when we're not at fault. But people who are in the position of needing any kind of public assistance, I guess they sometimes are made to feel that this is part of the bargain. Allison.
Hello, hi there. I'm kind of been invited to join by Tim from Riverside Group. Hi.
And where are you calling in from, Allison?
Claremont.
Oh,
yeah. So I'm looking at the gentleman on the floor. He's not shaved, and I just wondered if he'd had an awful lot to drink because he can't get up. And also I think the children are in their Sunday best. They look like they've all been dressed up for these important visitors. People had to go to church. There wasn't a choice. And if you didn't, the parish documented it. So there is that. And generally, actually, this room's, like you said, it's pretty tidy. I mean, they're doing their washing and laundry, although I don't know if that's happening because they know these. Did they know that they were going to have a visit from these ladies?
It's not mentioned that they are prepared for the visit.
They're not. Okay, so they're in the middle of their sort of domestic duties. It's not uncommon for people to either have relatives give them toys or to make their own toys, for poor families. It's interesting the stool's been either thrown or tipped over by somebody.
By Mrs. Pardiggle, it says specifically in the text that she's the one who knocked it over.
She knocked it over. Did she do that on purpose?
No, it's
No.
because she has
this big dress.
This big dress, yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that guy could have been sat on that stool perhaps and got off. I don't know. Maybe he fell off. He does look, it wouldn't be unusual for him to have had too much to drink, I don't think. And they seem to have a candle so they can light their room, and they look like they have a little teapot in the door. They are making food. It's not uncommon for babies to die and mums at this point. But anyway, those are things I can see.
What about Esther and Ada in the image? Can we comment on them?
Well, we have a bunch of hands raised. Wayne?
Wayne? Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say on behalf of the man on the floor, he's a working man. He may have had a drink, but he's probably also exhausted. He's been on his feet probably for 12 hours. So just a little to fill in the picture there, it's a wonderful illustration. And the little toy in the foreground is wonderful to me. That is, pressed as these people are, the child still has the toy. That's all, thanks.
Anybody want to comment on the depictions of Esther and Ada? Leslie?
Hi, yeah. I might be reading into this because of the text, but I seem to remember that they were kind of mortified to have been part of this event, mortified to have been seen with Mrs. Bartigal and her brood, and to see these hardworking people being castigated and looked down upon by her. It seems to me that they kind of want to just kind of fall into the floor and not want to be there. That is
Lu-
until they find until they see the baby, obviously.
Linda?
You asked about Ida and Esther. I think Esther is definitely looking at the child and the mother, the nursing mother, or the mother cradling her baby at this point. I can't quite tell with Ida whether she's looking at the man or at the mother.
I think you're right that Esther's focus is on the woman by the fire, who has the baby that subsequently dies in the
Right.
course of this event. I mean, that's this visit. Typically, Esther's face is not completely visible, whereas Ada's is frontal, and Ada is. I always think that Ada is even the name, which is the technical term palindrome, ADA. It reads forwards and backwards the same. That Ada is a kind of mirror for Esther. One of the possible identities for Esther is that she's a beautiful young woman. That who's outside the door?
I think it's just neighbors. If I remember from my reading.
What are they doing besides just looking in?
They're sneering at Mrs. Particle behind her back.
And they're laughing, which is partly sneering at Mrs. Pardiggle and laughing because the man on the floor is so, whether he's had a drink or not, has refused to go along with this visit. He's resisting. This is working class resistance. Their refusal to stand up, their refusal to look at her except the man who is resisting her. The man on the chair at the far right, we don't get much information about him, but the dog barks and barks at what Mrs. Pardiggle says. I think the man on the chair is getting the dog to bark so that the dog voices his resistance. I think the onlookers outside the door are laughing at this performance. It's and then the scene with the baby. What's going on with that? What's the importance of that?
Margot has her hand up.
I just wanted to say this picture shows up in my text where Mrs. Pardiggle is saying, "You can't tire me, good people." That she appreciates hard work, and the harder you make mine, the better I like it. But what is hard about her work? She's just sitting on it. She's knocking over things in their house that they have to pick up. And she's sitting there bringing all her children into a space where they're trying to get stuff done. But it's her hard work that's at issue. So I found that amusing.
A very good observation. And there are two working women in the scene. I mean, who are doing work.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So
I think we could make an argument that there's a gender division of labor in the working class family. But Wayne's comment about the fact that they may have been doing their 12 hours of labor and be exhausted and therefore need some rest. But still, it's the women who are working and Mrs. Pardiggle who claims to be working so hard as she sits there.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion, but maybe we can move on now. Now, this one is, we want to think over quite a bit, I think. Who wants to read this? Well, if there's no volunteer,
I
I'll read.
will. In
Oh.
short, I was in a flutter for a little while and felt as if an old cord had been more coarsely touched than it ever had been since the days of the dear old doll long buried in the garden.
And let's see what precedes that. What is it that I should have made a note of that, but she finished her books and payments, and she got through business, rearranged her desk. It's Mr. Guppy has just proposed. That's what the old cord has. So Mr. Guppy has proposed. She has sat down at her desk, and then she sums up the experience this way. Does anybody want to? I just was struck by the fact an old cord touched and the dear old doll long buried in the garden. John, did you have anything you wanted to say about this?
Why, just why is the doll associated with these moments of reflection? This is she's ended her busyness here and pauses and thinks and has memories.
But also the fact that there's some part of her affective life, her emotional life, that has been so brutalized that when she buries the doll, maybe she buries some part of her emotional life. And then when Mr. Guppy proposes, even though she finds it ludicrous to a certain extent, maybe that's the chord that, and she thinks of the doll because there's some awakening of an emotional life. I don't know. I mean, this is just a theory.
Glenna, I have a question for you. I should probably know this. If the doll was such an important transitional object, I couldn't understand, why did she bury it and not take it with her?
Very good question.
I feel badly, that poor doll's, under the earth. And it had been so important to her.
Well, if the doll is a stand-in for her emotional life in some fashion, maybe, I don't know. You'd think that she'd feel safer now that she's finally leaving this home where she's been so treated so brutally, in terms, not physically, but in terms of her emotional life. It's a wonderful question, and I'm interested in what people might have to say. Martha?
I'm thinking that she knows she's going to a new place and do an adult job. And she feels maybe her childhood is over and she has a new beginning. And that's why she buried the doll, because she's going to a new life.
I thought the doll was more of an adult than the people she had been living with.
Oh, I think the doll was very important to her while she was living in that situation. But, she's maybe thinking a little bit more adultly, slightly, at least slightly, because she knows she's going to a new situation where she has to be more adult-like. A new chapter.
One of the things that the psychoanalyst I mentioned, Winnicott, argues is that at a certain point, the infant, the child that is separating from the mother, no longer needs the transitional object, no longer needs the teddy bear or the blanket. And the phrase that he uses is the transitional object is relegated to obscurity. It's just left behind because the need for it, the need for that substitute figure is no longer there. So what Martha is suggesting is that this is, relegating the transitional object, the teddy bear, to obscurity, where it no longer has the power or significance or meaning that it held earlier. The child doesn't need it because the child is now growing up, going to an adult job, taking on independent existence, where the substitute figure, that transitional object, is no longer full of meaning.
Isn't there a famous poem or a piece from a novel? I leave old things behind me.
I'm sure there is, but I don't recognize that quote.
Okay.
I have some thoughts on it. I'm a Jungian, and I feel that this whole session that we're talking about Esther, that Dickens is really into depth psychology, and he's presenting Esther. He's trying to make you understand why she was the way she was, a self-reflective person. And now she's in this stage of transition where her life is changing, and she knows it because she's a self-reflective. So she's going to know it. But the thing is, we do this all through life. It's called like the door marked nevermore. You shut the door and you move on. She's very smart, and she's underrated by the academics. That's all I have to say. I mean, I really admire Dickens for creating her. But you have to watch. I'm not getting ahead of myself. As the novel goes on, it's called the individuation process. And this is what Dickens is handing to us. A lot of people don't understand it. That's why they put her down. But I'm a big admirer of her, of this character.
Yay for Team Esther. Sarah has had her hand up.
It's been too long.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that just from this paragraph, we don't know when she really buried the doll. We don't know that she buried it when she left the house. Maybe she buried it when she left the school. And there we really get a lot of evidence that she grew up and she changed a lot and she got more confidence. So whatever John said makes to me more sense if we believe that maybe she buried after school. This paragraph doesn't tell us when she buried the doll.
We do know that she buried the doll as she was leaving the school.
Do we know that?
Yes, we know that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She buried the doll before she left the house, before she left her godmother. She buried it 3 days before.
Yeah.
When I became a man, I put away childish things.
You guys are putting such interesting things into the chat. What a treasure of insights that I'm doing my best to keep abreast of. Wayne, you have your hand up.
Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Speaking as a doll collector, vintage Barbie dolls are very hard to find because for some reason, young women destroy their Barbie dolls at some point, in sometimes grotesque ways. And one explanation for this is that they are expressing their independence now from whatever the doll represented. So the other comment among doll collectors is that young women and becoming mothers would put their dolls in a trunk, saving them for their daughters. And that's, of course, those are the ones we always hope to find. So, who is the young woman on this slide, Courtney?
She's
just speaking as an old Esther.
I believe she's the woman who plays Esther in the BBC version of Bleak House.
Yes.
Well, looking at her, one can understand why Guppy is smitten. That's all. Thank you.
Margot?
I just wanted to say the idea that she was all aflutter and she returned to the thought of her old doll. She has people in her life, but she doesn't seem to have confidants, like a best friend that she can talk to about her emotional life. She's there for everyone else, but she doesn't seem to have those resources for herself. And that's why I would think the doll would come back to her at this point, because this is when you want to talk to somebody. This guy just proposed to me. This is so bizarre. What do I do? You know what I mean? It's like you'd be on the phone with your friend in a minute,
Yeah,
after
that's a
he was
wonderful
gone.
insight, I think.
Yeah.
Linda?
One of the things that really struck me about the proposal was how transactional it becomes. He begins by saying what would be expected in a proposal, making a comment that he adores her, going down on one knee. And he ends with saying, because you have an interest in this lawsuit, you will give me access to information that will enable me to enrich myself and maybe secondarily her as a wife. And I just thought she was somewhat laughing and crying at herself, seeing again how she begins with thinking all aflutter, and then it's like, wait a minute, where was this man going? And then in trying to take him seriously and realizing that she's been objectified as she has been by so many people, and crying.
Yep. Well, I'd like to talk about a few more things, so we should move on. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this passage, but this is the beginning of chapter 10, where we meet Mr. Snagsby, the law stationer. And I just want you to notice again, foolscap, brief, draft, brown, white, whitey brown, and blotting, and stamps, and office quills, pens. So there's another one of Dickens' long list, even more particular. And I just think it's interesting how often he gives you these lists of goods. And having said that, I don't necessarily want to linger on this. I just wanted to make the point, because we need to talk about more stuff. So then this is chapter 10. Is it chapter 10 where we meet Nemo? Yeah, chapter 10, we meet Nemo, the law scrivener, I guess you call him, and we find out that, we don't really even meet him alive. We meet his corpse. And we meet Mr. Snagsby and Mrs. Snagsby, and we've already encountered Crook. So these are all characters who we need to bear in mind. So now let's move on to the next passage. So now we've had the death of Nemo, and we've had the inquest into the death of Nemo, and we found that one of the few people who can say anything that really bears on the matter at hand is Joe, the sweeping boy, the crossing sweeper. And for those of you who have never read Bleak House before, I didn't know until, I started the Dickens universe exactly what a crossing sweeper was. But the streets were so full of horse manure and other filth that for people, particularly women in long skirts, to cross a street, the crossing sweeper would sweep ahead of them so that they could get across the street without soiling themselves in the process. So it's a very lowly job. And Joe is kind of one part of if the deadlocks are on one end of the continuum of the class structure, Joe is on the other end. Who wants to read this passage?
I'll read it.
I'll read it. Oops, go ahead.
With the night comes a slouching figure through the tunnel court to the outside of the iron gate. It holds the gates with its hands and looks in between the bars, stands looking in for a little while. It then, with an old broom it carries, softly sweeps the step and makes the archway clean. It does so very busily and trimly, and looks in again a little while, and so departs. Joe, is it thou? Well, well, though a rejected witness, who can't exactly say what will be done to him in greater hands than men's, thou art not quite in outer darkness. There is something like a distant ray of light in thy muttered reason for this. He was very good to me. He was.
Thank you. So, comments about this passage and the figure of Joe, whom we're meeting for the first time in this set of chapters.
I think it's interesting that they refer to him as it. It then with an old broom, and it is in the night. It holds the gate, that it doesn't refer to Joe as a person. It's not he, it's it.
Well, the referent is a slouching figure. So he isn't given a name.
Right, but he still could, you still could say a slouching figure, he or they, but he goes with it.
Pat?
Yeah, I love Joe. How could you help but not love Joe? And of course, London's a dirty city. I mean, cities are dirty, a little better now, but not perfect. But London was a really dirty city in the 1800s, so there had to be people doing the sweeping, and this kind of was uplifting to me, meeting Joe and the relationship he had with the guy who was doing the translations, whatever, Nemo, I guess. Yeah, I liked it.
Joe is certainly a memorable character. Barbara?
Yeah, I just want to point out that Dickens introduces the Joe character right at the beginning of the book, where he starts talking about how the necessity for the streets to be swept, and then as far as the craft is concerned, he starts to introduce the character. It's pretty nicely done.
Thank you. Sarah?
This entire story and section struck me like when we talk now and we read it, we really love Joe and we love Nemo, and their life and their relationship and their goodness is the main thing in the story for us. But the people who look for Joe, they care about evidence. They just need to know how to finalize the death of Nemo. And so, yeah, it's very interesting the way he wrote it.
Margot?
I love the humanity of Joe. And I had a personal experience recently. I was in Vienna where they have horse-drawn carriages. And I've never noticed this in New York, but I gotta say, just from the carriages that they have in the town, taking people around, the smell was awful. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is just like maybe, 10, 20 carriages in a certain part of town. can you imagine what it would be like in London? It just
Yeah.
came, and they don't let the horse manure land up on the ground. They've got a system for picking it up so it doesn't even go onto the ground, but it's just unbelievable, the smell. It was very unattractive to the city to me.
Well, I have to say that when I was a little girl, one hot July day in the Central Valley, I was a baton twirler in a parade, and we were marching behind the horses. So that's what I think of when I think of London streets in this time. Alexis?
Oh, where I see, you see Mrs. Particle, and then you see the only person who is helping the destitute child is another destitute person. Nemo has nothing. What little he has, he shares with Joe. And that's real humanity, in spite of all these so-called religious people doing their duty by the poor. They're doing nothing material to help him.
Thank you. Any other comments on this passage or on the character of Joe? I'm glad, I guess it was Barbara who brought up that we understand the personage of a crossing sweeper. I mean, the brilliant opening of this novel, which is challenging but brilliant, sets the stage for so much of what's to come. John?
A couple of things about this very beautiful and moving passage. One is that this is about charity, and it's about giving gifts. And Nemo has been charitable to Joe. As someone just said, he's a lower class figure who is kind and generous to another lower class destitute person. And Nemo is now dead, and Joe wants to repay the kindness that Nemo has demonstrated toward him. And how do you do that? How do you honor a death of someone who was good to you? And you can't give anything back. All you can do is honor that person. And the only thing that Joe has to give is his labor and his broom. And he sweeps the step. And that's his way of honoring and recognizing and commemorating the kindness that Nemo demonstrated toward him. And Joe, in the last of these three little paragraphs, though a rejected witness who can't exactly say what will be done to him in greater hands than men's, Joe doesn't have words. He can't exactly say. So the only way in which he can commemorate Nemo is an action that doesn't require words. Joe gets rejected at the inquest because they don't consider him to be a person. He's beneath humanity. But in this passage, he demonstrates his common humanity. But the other thing, the last thing to point out is to ask a question. This is a genuine question, not a teacher kind of question. It's who speaks? Joe, is it thou? Who's using that intimate second person? Thou art not quite in outer darkness. Who's being quoted here? Usually when you see something inside quotation marks, we know what can't exactly say refers to, because that goes back to the inquest. But Joe, is it thou? Who's speaking? There's something like a distant ray of light in thy muttered reason for all this. And then Joe, this is Joe in language. He was very good to me. He was.
You think it's supposed to be Nemo who's speaking from the grave? Because it's a graveyard, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it could be. You could extrapolate that.
I think it's God.
Yep.
God. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, okay.
Wayne?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yep.
Well, this is a stretch, but Joe, is it thou? John's question reminds me of moments in the second half of the Odyssey when someone addresses the swineherd, Eumaeus, oh my swineherd. And it's the muse herself saying it. It's someone, it's not just the narrator, certainly not Odysseus, but someone beyond the narrator. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? We're getting somewhat close to the, oh, Michael?
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about this in this chapter. There's at least 3 times where the eyes in the shutter are mentioned. And I've marked 2 of them, but I can't find the third one right off. I think the third one comes before. So if we could talk about that for a minute, help clarify that. This is at the coroner's inquest. There's a piano, and this is on page 179, if you have the Penguin edition. The jingling piano at last is silent, and the harmonic friends rally around their pillows. Then there is rest around the lonely figure, who I guess is Nemo, now laid in its earthly habitation, and is watched by the gaunt eyes in the shutters through some quiet hours of night. And then it's referenced right before this passage about Joe, I believe. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's on 173. It's before. Under cover of the night, the feeble-minded beetle comes flitting about Chancery Lane. And then he goes up to some appointments that he has upstairs with his papers. And he says, presently arriving, they're conducted upstairs. When they leave, the great eyes in the shutter, something new to stare at, in that last shape with earthly lodgings, take for no one, who is Nemo, and for everyone. Does anybody have a thought about what that's referring to?
Do you have a thought about it?
Well, to me, it goes back to what I think Wayne or somebody said about it's God. That's God's voice. It is thou. Is this God looking in on what's happening and how the poor are being treated, and observing it? And to me, it goes back to that the whole portrait of the brick maker's family. To me, Esther is looking at the most important thing in the room that is happening, the death of somebody's child. And, Mrs. Pardiggle is worried about getting her message across effectively or ineffectively, and can't, handle her own children, her own family. And it is a reflection to me on the continued abuse of the poor, abuse in a lot of different ways, abuse of women and poor people. That's my reading of it. I don't know.
To me, it seems like the author, the narrator, is taking a reflection of candles, maybe, and then imaginatively thinking of them as eyes. But no, I think it's really interesting. Let's take Pat's question and then move on to the.
Yeah, well, we can, have we already passed the chapter where they have the ridiculous trial in regard to the opium as to the cause of death, where Dickens is kind of going back now to his topic of the delay of justice and how justice is so ridiculously handled, and people are dragging their feet, and it takes 100 years to settle a case, and all of the obsequiousness of the participants. I hope that's the right word. Anyway, but are we going to get back to that again? Because that's the opposite part of all of this nicety, you know, is what Dickens is trying to do with the case of Jarndyce and Jarndyce. You know, that justice is never met.
Yeah, that's the inquest, and that we've gone beyond that. But yes, I mean, obviously, this novel, what shall I say? It examines and holds up to the light of judgment what justice is all about in his contemporary society. Kathy, one more question, and then I want to move on.
Say something about what Pat said. I think what's happening with the Chancery, and Dickens, obviously he worked as a reporter, so he knew the courts really well. And what's happening with the Chancery is still happening today. And I want to explain that a little bit. So, what's happening is the lawyers are taking all the money. That's really what's happening. That's number one. And the second thing is that this is what dysfunctional families do. They sue because they didn't get enough love or they're mad at somebody. And that the Chancery Court is very much like, again, I won't even explain, but I do this a lot. So conservatorships, if you think of, the famous people who were conserved, cost an arm and a leg, as my mother used to say. And that's what's happening in the Chancery and Dickens' point of view. And it happens right now today, that if you try to settle these messes with these terrible dysfunctional families, all the money gets taken by all the attorneys that have to come in and deal with this mess. And that's, so it's still occurring today. And that's what was occurring then.
Well, I've read many times that Bleak House is assigned in law school.
Yeah, well, it should be. Didn't take away. It's still happening, though.
So I want to spend time on the last paragraph of chapter 12, but I'm going to jump ahead of chapter 12 just to say that then, before we get to the end of chapter 13, we have learned that Richard needs to find some kind of a job, a career, a means of supporting himself. And he's kind of lackadaisical. Will it be this? Will it be that? And he finally decides on medicine. And we don't have time to go into it in any detail. But for me, anyhow, the passages about the Bayham Badger household and how Mrs. Badger, her first and second husbands were so distinguished, and Captain Dingo and so on. I find that just hilarious. I love it's so. And then Courtney, could we skip ahead to the final image? Yeah, the family portraits. So we have to look at the family portraits of the first and second husbands, and I just, for whatever reason, it just strikes me hilarious. And of course, this is another. This isn't a grand home like the Dedlocks, but it's certainly a prosperous professional man whose home it is. Now let's go back one slide to the 196, the passage on 196. Okay, so this is the final paragraph in chapter 12. We've already, very early in the novel, we meet Mr. Tulkinghorn, and he shows the paperwork, and Lady Dedlock takes an extraordinary interest in one document, and Mr. Tulkinghorn is determined to figure out why and what it all means. Who's up for reading this paragraph?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Mr. Tulkinghorn does so with deference and holds it open while she passes out. She passes close to him with her usual fatigued manner and insolent grace. They meet again at dinner, again, next day, again, for many days in succession. Lady Dedlock is always the same exhausted deity, surrounded by worshippers and terribly liable to be bored to death, even while presiding at her own shrine. Mr. Tulkinghorn is always the same speechless repository of noble confidences, so oddly out of place and yet so perfectly at home. They appear to take as little note of one another as any two people enclosed within the same walls could. But whether each ever more watches and suspects the other, ever more mistrustful, or some ever more mistrustful of some great reservation, whether each is ever more prepared at all points for the other and never to be taken unawares, what each would give to know how much the other knows. All this is hidden for the time in their own hearts.
Any comments about this passage? John, do you have anything to say about this passage?
All this is hidden for the time in their own hearts. Remember when Esther, in very early in the first time that she's speaking, she says that she tells all of her secrets to her doll. And this is a novel about secrets. And it's about secrets that are hidden. And it's also a detective novel.
Yeah.
And we've encountered many detectives already in the novel. And you know, what's the secret? What's the secret that everyone is looking for, and how do they go about finding it? And so there's some people interested in hiding secrets. And what will they do when they find secrets? What will they do with them? What does exposure mean? And what strategies are used to hide secrets? Why is Lady Dedlock bored and exhausted and always the same? Those are the kinds of questions that come to my mind in reading a passage like this.
I just think for myself, I think that the interplay, there are so many things that I love about this novel, but the interplay between these two characters is so interesting. And this, I think, is a brilliant paragraph to kind of set the stage. This is the state of play at this moment in time. But when you talk about never to be taken unawares, blah, 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 you pretty well can anticipate that this almost like a minuet that they're dancing is going to continue. Leslie?
Just one phrase, cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
It's starting, it has already started, but it's going to start to heat up, and that takes us, well, I'm not going to say anymore.
Okay. Kathy?
But I have to find, can somebody help me find my voice?
Excuse me?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Turkinghorn is a fabulous character to me. And what he does is he keeps everyone's secrets. He knows everything about all his very, very rich clients, and he's keeping them to, in Lady Deadlock's case, use against them. And I think that, they're his manipulation. And he reminds me, this is a far out thing, but of Epstein, all the things he's been accused of. But one of the things that Epstein was accused of was keeping all the secrets of the very, very wealthy men who were abusing women, even like videotapes, which Turkington didn't have, Turkington, and then threatening them with exposure. So, he's a horrible character, and incredibly manipulative, but I think he's a wonderful villain. Anyway.
Amen to that. And Barbara?
Just the play of power. In your lifetime, how many people have you known who have their own room in somebody's big house that they don't even know if they're going to come there or not, or when they're going to come or not, and it's permanently set aside for them. This man has tremendous power, as we've already said.
Well, we're almost at the end of our time together. I was a bit of a slave driver, but we covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. So I'm grateful to you for coming along for the ride. And John, do you have any last words you want to say, or I yield the floor?
We need a volunteer for the session in, Courtney, remind me, it's January and February, correct?
January and February.
Yes, to lead discussion. And I think, Glenna, you've done a wonderful job. Whether you were a slave driver or not, you got us through the passages and important scenes. And I think you did a splendid job. So Glenna is a model for what someone might do as a discussion leader. So thank you, Glenna, and thank you everyone for joining us. And isn't this a wonderful novel? I mean,
it is.
Yes.
Oh, it's so good.
And,
yes, thank you.
So thanks
before we
again,
go,
Glenna.
I just want to mention that Liz Pollock, who sells books for us at the Dickens universe, has a dozen copies of the Penguin Classics edition of Bleak House. So if anyone's interested, she's selling them and can ship them out starting tomorrow, free shipping. So Liz, would you put your email in the chat for folks if they're interested in purchasing this?
Of course, one of the advantages of the Penguin edition is that it has all the illustrations.
Yeah.
Oh, here, I've got it. Oh, here we go.
Thank you, Glenna. I was looking so forward to seeing you again, and I miss you dearly.
Well, I'm missing everybody in person, but Zoom sure beats the heck out of not at all.
And those of you that don't know, Glenna lives in Laguna Hills, and she literally lives on a cliff overlooking the beach and the ocean. It is quite a treacherous trek, but it's worth it because she's such a wonderful hostess.
Well, y'all come. But it's Laguna Beach, not Laguna Hills.
And by the way, last year's universe, Glenna was leading us in discussions, and she was simply tremendous. It was, for those of you that can't travel, like unfortunately I cannot travel, it's very, very worthwhile to register for the virtual universe. It's tremendous. And one reason was last year's leadership by Glenna.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Au revoir.
Okay, everyone. Thank you
Glenn.
again. And thank you, Glenna. Thank you, Courtney. See you next month.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, all my beautiful friends. Thank you.